In my last video, I asked whether Antarctica is worth visiting as a landscape photographer, and whether a tripod is worth the hassle. The short answer is yes, with caveats. Today I want to take a step back and ask a bigger question. If gear is secondary, what, more generally, should you look forward to from a visit to Antarctica? But of course, I will take some photos along the way too. Photography is usually a solitary pursuit for me. I can enjoy company, but when others are around, I find it hard to focus. 5 days into ship life, sharing meals, swapping stories and staying up too late, I was already running low on energy. Out here, well below 60 degrees south, I felt like my normal rhythm and discipline were unravelling too. I have to say that so far this trip has been nothing less than exhausting. It's even worse now though, because the mood has started up, the mood that I've been praying for. Snow started falling, we've got high overcast skies with directional light, and now it's not just the landings and the Zodiac cruises that are exhausting, it's also the time spent on the side of the deck. I've been playing around with the 200 to 600, and I've been waiting for icebergs holding penguins to float past and try and get some good alignments there. There was a big long line of them a second ago, and they were porpoising, just about to line up with a lovely triangular iceberg, and then they took a deep dive and disappeared for the entire time that the alignment happened. But that's the way it seems to go here. Like there's something going off in every direction, but you're not always able to capture it. Too many nights at the bar combined with adventure-packed days were starting to catch up with me, and the old mariner's saying from the start of this video was beginning to feel half true. We're far from the heroic age, and the laws south of 60 degrees are stricter, but I was tired enough to feel a touch of uncharacteristic nihilism, even in spite of the stunning surroundings. That feeling only deepened when one of my hard drives failed, wiping most of what I had recorded on deck, along with a Zodiac trip from that morning. Fortunately, none of the material for Polar Latitudes and Swoop Adventures was lost, but the conditions had been perfect, and losing personal work was absolutely gutting. Back in Bristol, I managed to recover some fragments, but a full mechanical rebuild of the hard drive will be expensive. A few frames did survive though, and I'll share some of them here. Imagine these atmospheric misty mountains with a seal floating on an iceberg in the foreground, and you'll see why I'm tempted to pay for the recovery costs. Vanity tells me that these images might have been worth it, but honestly, there's probably nothing portfolio quality there. Still, it is frustrating to have lost the first day of truly photographic weather. The glorious conditions continued during that day's landing, and I was eager to get out the tripod and make some more considered images. But first, we paused to enjoy the muffled sounds of the snowy landscape and the raucous chatter of a chin-strapped penguin colony. I didn't bring a second tripod on, so you're going to have to make do with some handheld phone footage to document this shot. Let me turn the camera around. I noticed this lovely ripple in the foreground before the snow meets the rocks, and I started off with a square composition, working in black and white. Still working in black and white, but I've switched to 4:3, and I think it works quite well. So I have found this lovely diagonal line running through this scene, and then another diagonal leads back up to the penguin colony there, and then you can't see it so much in this frame. I think maybe you can if I pull back a little bit, but there's another diagonal of the peninsula over there, and I started framing it up square, but in the end I went with 4:3, and it's got a lovely rhythm to the image, so I'm pretty pleased with that. I'm going to head back out onto the Zodiac now to try and catch some wildlife, but I don't have high hopes that anything's going to be better than this. This is probably my favourite image I've taken from a tripod during this trip. Problem with not being able to put your bag down on the mainland here is that if I want to do any long exposures, I have to walk back to a tarp to put my bag down and get the filter system out and choose very carefully. I've got my camera set up. Where is it? Set up there. Just walking down to the top, which is about 50 metres. Change my filter system, so it's leading to me being a little bit more organised than usual, which is a bit chaotic in these situations. This is what I had in mind when I was planning the Antarctica trip, and it works quite well as a square. The visual flow takes your eyes on a journey through the frame, and I was pleased with the postures of the penguins. I was unconscious of the textures in the sky while I worked, but they must have registered somewhere, as halfway through this shoot I started using an L bracket to orient my camera vertically. I think I prefer this tool of framing. When you pump up the dehaze on the later images, the clouds add an extra triangle, subtly accentuating the repetition of interlocking geometry. Knowing that this frame contains gold to sift for is one thing, but treating it with the subtlety it deserves is quite another. Using contrast adjustments sparingly in the sky to bring out cloud definition can be a tricky balance, but here I found that a combination of luminosity masking and a radial gradient did an okay job. The harsh contrast between the snow and the rock in the foreground was also hard to balance. When the snow is too bright, it grabs all your attention, but if you lower the contrast, it becomes muddy and loses its visual appeal. I always apply a subtle Alton effect to the highlights of my images, but for this edit, I increased the opacity of that filter in the areas I wish to remain bright white, but not too harsh. I hope I got the balance right, but as always, I will have to come back to this image for a while before I know for sure. This may well be a familiar story if you watched my last video, but while I was waiting in line for the Zodiac tour of the headland, I got distracted when some charismatic penguins put on a performance for us, and I ended up staying on land to take some of my favourite images of wildlife in the landscape of the whole trip. There is a lot to like about this. The headland is obscured almost to the point of disappearing. Meanwhile, the rocks are sharp in their details and colourful when polarised. The shutter speed was fast enough to capture the penguins in their expressive gestures, while slow enough to keep some movements of the snow flurries. I don't know about you, but I like odd numbers. With animals or humans, groups of 3, 5 or 7 are usually preferable to even huddles. There are a few collective nouns for penguins. A colony, a raft and a waddle are all good, but here a tuxedo of penguins seems most suitable. In fact, I missed all of the Zodiac safaris where staying on land was an option instead. I may have regretted this choice occasionally, especially when a safari group came back with stories of close encounters with humpback whales, but in general I was happy to focus on the landscape. Eventually we had to take the last Zodiac back to the ship though. Antarctica's landscapes and wildlife are astonishing, but so were all the people. The crew, the expedition leaders, and my fellow passengers were all fascinating to spend time with. Nights often ran long, and I'm hopeless with hangovers, but it was difficult to feel too sorry for yourself when another adventure awaited at dawn. By the end though, burning the candle at both ends and in the middle was starting to catch up with me. I'm not sure anyone should look this grumpy when they're around penguins, but somehow I managed it. On this, our final landing of the trip, I thought I knew what to expect from a visit to shore, and I decided to travel a little lighter than usual. This, it turned out, was a bad calculation. So we are on our final landing on Antarctica, and I thought I'd learnt my lessons about what to expect from these landings, and I decided not to bring a set of ND filters and graduated ND filters onto the land, because usually you don't have time to really take your time and set them up properly. But this seems to be the one beach where we're able to comb along and have a little bit of free rein. And I've been playing with this iceberg as a foreground, penguins in the midground, and a beautiful glacier on the horizon. Because I didn't bring my ND filter set, I decided to leave out as much water as possible, because I really don't like choppy water. So I've been using the rocks and the ice as leading lines instead. I'll show you my composition. So I've got this lovely block of ice in the foreground with a hole through it, and I was trying to get artistic shots of penguins through the hole. Did you get anything?
A picture?
Oh, they're right in my frame now. I'm just going to shoot off a couple of shots. They're perfectly framed. So I'm using this ice as a corner anchor, and then the lovely sweep of these rocks in the midground leads into the water, which just creates a little bit of tonal separation, and you've got this lovely peak sticking out of the glacier there, and it's working really well. I think probably one of my favourite compositions of the whole trip so far, and sod's law, I wouldn't bring ND filters on the one place that I can use them to my heart's content. As much as I like this while I was framing it up, I'm not sure it works that well. I like the element, but again there is harsh contrast between the ice in the foreground and the greening rocks where the penguins stand. Unlike with the image of the penguin colony earlier, I didn't want to soften the chunk of ice with an autumn glow. Perhaps I'm being too overcritical, but I'm not sure if this image has enough merit for me to give it the time it needs to get the balances just right and bring out the character of the place. This landing on Mikkelsen Harbour allowed us some of our best landscape photography opportunities, and although I grumbled at the time about not bringing my filters, the pivot away from thinking about long exposure photography provided different opportunities that I may have missed if I had been glued to the shore with a tripod. Exploring this outpost, I got to enjoy some time with my fellow passengers, and we watched the penguins making their ungainly way across the land, and sleepy seals yawning on the snow. I'm surprisingly pleased with these images. They don't have the usual punch that I try and work out of my landscape shots, but they are subtle, and are the sort of images that I would like to see as a print on my wall, not as a centerpiece that grabs all your attention, but as pleasant decoration. As well as the limited focus on water, the frame is also remarkable in my collection for two reasons. First, I went for a panoramic crop, and second, it contains very little sky. I rarely shoot without including at least a slither of sky, but I like this ice field without a clear skyline. I also like this composition of a penguin waddling around an iceberg, and it works well as a square crop. However, I had the same problem editing this image as I did with the photos earlier. When you look at the ice on location, there is so much texture, detail, and colour. But when you go to edit the final photo, the dynamic range is so extreme that it's hard to preserve the details of the ice, and if you do, the image ends up looking fragmented and over-processed. I think I managed to achieve the balance here, by using dehaze on the ice to bring out the micro-contrast, but it was still a tough edit. After soaking up our last bit of atmosphere from Antarctica, we returned to ship and prepared for our journey home. As we crossed the Drake Passage, I reflected on the trip. This had been quite an adventure. I succeeded in getting some tripod-based landscape photos, and I am pleased with some of the images. However, perhaps some of my favourites from the trip came from shooting handheld, and sometimes from the side of the Zodiacs. Beyond photography, my biggest takeaway was the people. Both the crew of the ship, the expedition leaders, and the other passengers were remarkable. Many of the expedition staff had been aboard for months, and it made me wonder what it would be like to live in this constant state of travel. As we passed Cape Horn and into the Beagle Channel, seabirds trailed the ship. They say an albatross can stay airborne for years, feeding and sleeping on the wing. As much as I love adventure, I couldn't live like that permanently. I enjoyed the social side of this journey. It was a refreshing contrast to my usual solitary trips, but I didn't return feeling recharged in the same way I do after travelling alone. And by the end I was craving a solo shoot, so I could shuffle my thoughts into place. So I've been exploring this composition for about an hour and a half, and I think I've finally got something that I'm really pleased with. I've known about this location for about the last 4 years, and I've been back every year bar one, and each time I've only just missed the perfect bluebell wild garlic combination. And this year again, it's about a week until the wild garlic's at its optimal flowering stage for photography. But there's no guarantee that you'd get a misty day like this again in a week's time, so I decided to come out anyway and explore a little bit. And I'm really glad I did. Eventually I nailed down a composition that I'm really happy with, and I'll show it to you now. As you can see, I'm perched rather awkwardly on this dry stone wall, and I'm playing Twister with my tripod to try and create the separation between the different elements and create flow through the scene. The sun has burnt through the clouds now, and it's creating some hot spots, and the composition is no longer working, but I will talk you through it anyway. So I'm composing in a square, and I'm using this broken branch as a lead-in line to draw you down towards the wild garlic here. And then there's a rock over there which creates a lovely little interest point as it leads your eye through the scene towards this beautiful fan shape of this old gnarled tree. I'll switch to a wider lens now which doesn't take the polarizer, but while I was composing before with the 20mm lens, I was using polarization to take the sheen off the leaves of the wild garlic and make a real clear green run through this flow here and out towards the subject tree. With a complex composition such as this, often I'll set up my tripod, compose very carefully, and then I'll rest my eyes and have a cup of tea, and then revisit the composition and see what's wrong with it. Often when I return to it, I'll notice what I've done wrong the first time around. With this subject, for example, I noticed when I came back to it that there was a leaf in one of the corners that was interrupting the visual flow somewhat, and I recomposed to remove that element. The other thing I noticed this time around was because the depth of field was so deep, because the stick is almost touching the lens, there was a lot of focus breathing, and actually when it was at its closest focus, my whole composition was not what I wanted it to be. So I had to move the tripod back slightly to include a bit more of the scene and to make sure that that issue with focus breathing was mitigated. This image is everything I had hoped it would be since I first came across this scene. Because there were no time constraints other than the challenging atmospherics, I could dial in the composition and make it work. As with all woodland photography, there are parts of this scene which are not ideal, but forests are so chaotic that you have to make compromises when you're composing. This photo shoot in the woods is almost the exact opposite of the Antarctic landscape photography shooting experience. In Cheddar, the inner game was simplifying the chaos of the forest. In Antarctica, the snow and ice made the work of composing almost too easy. The challenge was focusing on one thing, while 1,000 other amazing things jostled to distract you. I don't really know why I chose Cheddar as a location to end this series, but something about it works. A few years ago I remember a night shoot here where I was enchanted by the atmosphere. When rocks shifted under my feet, they echoed off the walls, and tawny owls called to each other across the gorge. I have been to few places that feel more prehistoric than Cheddar did that night. However, one of those places is Antarctica. In the Cretaceous period, Antarctica was ice-free and a swampy, temperate rainforest. I like to see some symmetry here between ancient Antarctica and my native island's Woodland, but maybe that's a stretch. I shot this epilogue to my Antarctica trip back in April, a full 2 months after my return. As I walked back to the car, I tried to summarise my key takeaways from the cruise. But when I tried to edit this monologue, I realised how garbled my thoughts about the adventure still were back then. Truth be told, even now in late August as I write this voiceover, I'm still having dreams about Antarctica. Clearly my subconscious hasn't finished processing. It took me longer to edit this series than I was expecting, and perhaps this is one of the reasons why. The fragmented sequences from Antarctica have been difficult to weave into a narrative. It took me 3 months to process the footage and work out a rough order, and then it took a further 4 months to edit the quick cut sections of these vlogs. By contrast, the morning in Cheddar took a few hours to work into a rough cut. That's it for my Antarctica series. I'd like to thank Swoop Adventure and Polar Latitudes for making all this possible. If you are new to this channel, I'm not a regular poster. I take photo and video trips a few times a year and release the behind-the-scenes video diary as a weekly series after I have edited, usually a few months later.